Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing some unedited thoughts and reflections and opinions about 38 years ago today, December 8th, 1980. Now, before I get started, I want to say that there's a name that I'm not going to be mentioning. It's bad enough that I had to do a couple of things of research that I probably have forgotten about. But first, I kind of want to go back to that day. You know, it's one of those, where were you when? And by the way, I never say John Lennon died or the death of John Lennon. I say John Lennon was murdered. On this day, this is not the day John Lennon died, this is the day John Lennon was murdered. And I'll get into that. But what was I doing on December 8th, 1980? I was 7 years old. And I remember specifically, I was watching a production of Richard Strauss's opera Der Rosenkavalier on the local Chicago PBS channel, Channel 11, WTTW. I liked opera. My grandfather on my mom's side, he was big into classical music and opera, and he got me into that as well. Some of the great memories I have of him are playing his records and his operas. And I think it went till 10 o'clock. I remember specifically, and I found a record of an old TV guide to confirm everything. But I believe it went till 10 o'clock, and I went to bed. I believe I had school the next day, 7 years old. And my room was situated as such where I could still hear the television in the living room where my parents were watching it. And I remember clearly on the news, I don't remember if it was the local news or if it was the network news. But I remember hearing John Lennon had been shot in New York outside of his apartment. And of course we'll have more details on it as events unfold. And then after that I heard John Lennon had been shot dead. That one I remember specifically. John Lennon was shot dead. I bolted out of my bed and went to my parents. Does that mean he died? I mean, obviously, but I couldn't comprehend it, or I didn't want to comprehend it. I was 7 years old, but I was a Beatle fan. Beatle fan because of my dad's albums and my godfather Richard's records, who was a huge Beatle maniac. So I knew John Lennon was shot. But I didn't cry. I was still a bit too young to comprehend death. I knew he wasn't coming back, but the impact didn't hit me as a 7-year-old. But I can tell you, me being a Beatle fan became an obsession starting at that point, especially over the next couple of days when there was Beatle stuff everywhere. And I remember seeing news reports, the events unfolding outside of the Dakota in New York, and the candlelight vigils happening in all of the major cities, even in Chicago. And I saw the outpouring of love. And I'm sure I was questioning as to why this happened. As I got older, this day became less about sadness and more about anger. Because my opinions about what happened and who did this have made me angry. I don't think he was crazy. I still say the idiot was not crazy. Despite what he says and despite the fact that he found Jesus in prison, I don't think he was crazy. I had to do some research on this, and there are clips out there on YouTube. There's a little documentary out there that I watched, and I unfortunately had to go to Wikipedia, but as a rule, I try not to look up his name. I know his name. It's in the back of my head. I heard it enough back then, and I hear it enough over the years, but I try not to mention it. I always say that guy, that man, or the man whose name will not be mentioned. Because every time his name is mentioned, that's another Google hit, that's another Wikipedia hit. He's up there. And he's getting exactly what he wanted to begin with. Why did he do it? Watch Martin Scorsese's 1983 film The King of Comedy with Robert De Niro and Jerry Lewis. Watch the character of Rupert Pupkin. That's why he did it. To be famous. The district attorney and the prosecuting attorneys had him checked out by doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists. Now, of course, his defense team did as well. And both of them came back with different opinions. The defense team was trying to present him as mentally unstable. He's not guilty by reason of insanity and all of that. But the court also appointed doctors. Now, the court is neutral. The court-appointed doctors found him not to be psychotic. His delusions were normal delusions. In other words, in my opinion, he was making up those delusions. Think about what he did and how he did it. This was pre-planned, meditated murder. After the Dakota security guard got the gun away from him, he didn't flee the murder scene. He didn't do what any person did. He stood there at the curb and waited for the police. What's his famous quote? When the police officer questioned him, what's his famous quote? I'm not going to repeat it. If you want to look it up, go ahead. But what's his famous quote? What did he say happened? I got the soundbite. I got what they're going to print in the paper underneath my mugshot. I got it all. I am going to have my 15 minutes of glory here. Nothing psychotic about that. Sorry, I know his excuses. I know what he said. I know the evil forces that he said supposedly entered his body. Bullshit, in my opinion. Excuse my language. Now, he shocked everybody, including his defense attorneys, when he decided to plead guilty by reason of insanity. Boom, good, go to jail, doesn't have to take the stand. But he's up for parole now every 2 years. Every 2 years, Yoko has to write a letter to the parole board asking them to not release him and why. But Yoko's getting up there in age. Yoko's getting up there in age. Yoko's not going to be around much longer, unfortunately. Paul, I don't think, has ever done that, but Paul's getting up there in age, and so is Ringo. Who's going to do it? There's going to come a point when this guy is going to be released, when the parole board is going to say he's fully rehabilitated. He's not a threat to anybody anymore. And every 2 years, his mugshot's in the paper, his name is mentioned, and he gets exactly what he wants. That makes me angry. He gets exactly what he wants. 15 more minutes added to his fame. Now, I'm not mentioning his name here. One of the reasons why I'm doing this unedited is because I don't even want to show a picture of him. He is that guy. Now, after John was killed, there was a massive outpouring of love, sadness, and grief everywhere. Something that a lot of the hipster critics and cynical rock critics out of there to this day still don't understand as why. Well, everybody dies. He was just a guy. The great Lester Bangs did a piece about this, and if you have the book Psychotic Reactions and Carburetor Dung, it's reprinted in that book. He basically said this outpouring that everybody did was, less about John and more about the ex-hippies finally mourning for the loss of their innocence, if that makes sense. And I get offended when people say John Lennon died or the death of John Lennon. Let's put some perspective into this, especially with some of these rock critics that still don't understand why people were flocking to the Dakota and in Central Park and in all of the major cities in America holding candlelight vigils for John Lennon. It had to do with the way he went and how he went. The only other person that I can recall in music that was shot was Marvin Gaye. And that was a family squabble. And his father, unfortunately, defended that. So you didn't have the outpouring that happened with John. But with John, it had to do with the fact that this guy, some lone guy, went and did this for no apparent reason at all. Rightly or wrongly, Marvin Gaye's father claimed self-defense. And that's a different story, but he's the only other person that I can recall who was shot in music. Actually shot by somebody and killed. This never happened in music. And it was confusing for everybody as to why this happened. Why would anybody do this? This was sick. It was disgusting. Why? I came up with my own conclusion. That's why people flocked and did what they did, and still do what they do every year. John Lennon was not a hero. In fact, all four Beatles, none of them were heroes or role models. But that's why I like them. They're flawed, and everybody's flawed. And John at least acknowledged his shortcomings. And he was trying to learn. So here we are as Beatle fans and Lennon fans on another December 8th. And there's going to be a lot of articles out there today. A lot of articles, a lot of clickbait, a lot of stuff mentioning everything. I encourage you all, don't click on any of that. Take out a record of Lennon, play some Lennon music, play some Beatles, remember the good times, but don't click on the articles, because one, they'll probably make you angry, and two, they'll be mentioning that guy's name. Have a safe day.